Well, hello and good evening, and welcome to Tuesday Night Live. Thank you so much for joining me on this Halloween, of course, All Hallows Eve. And we'll look at that in a little bit of detail very shortly. But as well as Halloween, today is also Reformation Day. For hundreds of years, Protestant Christians have celebrated Reformation Day on October the 31st. Because on this day in 1517 is when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses onto the door of a Catholic church in Wittenberg in Germany. Luther, of course, was protesting against papal indulgences, which were really offerings that people were making for the atonement of sins, either for themselves or for relatives who were in purgatory, so they were told, and so they had to make monetary payments, these indulgences. And Luther had a gutful, so he, you can Google the 95 Theses and you'll see what he was protesting. But of course, out of that was a great reformation of the Christian faith, of course, known and then from there on in as Protestants or Protestants, because of Luther protesting. So there you go, a couple of well-known days. As I say, tonight's topic is Halloween. We'll get to that in just a few moments. Welcome to you if you're joining me for the very first time on Tuesday Night Live. Thanks for tuning in. And wherever you are watching, whether it be on Facebook or YouTube, whatever you put in the posts on the chat feed will come through to me here in the StreamYard studio, so you can make comments, ask questions, and I will interact with those as we go. Of course, you can message me during the week, and hi to those of you who are watching this during the week, as I know many people do. If you'd like to send me a message or a comment anytime, you can do so, either via my Facebook Messenger. Get my thoughts in order here, or you can email connect@baysidechurch.com.au, and that email will get through to me. So I'd love to hear from you at either of those. But just before we get into the topic tonight, let me check your comments. Lots of people here. Mark Brown, you are first up, mate. Looking forward to another exciting evening. G'day to Merv. Hi to Sam. Grant, God bless you. Good evening to you. Tal thinks I got a great costume on. Thank you so much. It's not my Halloween costume. There's a colourful jumper, this actually. It's kind of blue and black stripes. And then, of course, I've got this green arm for some reason. So anyway, Christy bought it for me years ago in Ireland. So that's why it's got a touch of green, I guess. G'day to Kirsten, still in Vietnam, doing a great work over there. God bless you. G'day to Mark. Hi, Kelly. Gerald, God bless you. Gerald is watching from Zambia. Gerald, of course, heads up Bayside Church in Lusaka in Zambia, and that is going so well, going really, really well. They baptized over 40 people recently, and the church is going from strength to strength. So lovely to see what God is doing right in the heart of Africa. Question from Tal. Really, Luther did that on today? I guess the Pope should have chosen to give a treat. Just saying. Very good. Not a trick. Selena says, thanks for sharing that interesting fact. And hi to you, and good evening to Carolyn as well. So lots of people joining me from all over the place, which is absolutely wonderful. So you can keep those comments and questions going through the next hour that we have together. Just a reminder, over the last couple of weeks, just in case you missed out, Shane Willard has been my special guest over the last 2 Tuesday nights. And we've done a deep dive into the scriptures, looking at human sexuality. And so Sex and the Scriptures will be part of the Digging Deeper podcast that will go live tomorrow. Tomorrow will be part 1. And then next Wednesday will be part 2 of Sex and the Scriptures. So if you want to catch that, feel free. Some revolutionary teaching from Shane. I know those of you who joined me and Shane for that have really enjoyed it, and really liberating stuff. And so I encourage you to listen and then share that with other people as you go, if you think there's people that could really benefit from that. All right, let's get into tonight's topic, Halloween. And I've got this question here from Sam. She says, "Hey, Rob, I've just seen this on a pastor's Facebook page of a prominent church in Melbourne. What are your thoughts?" And so the post that Sam refers to, it's likely that you've seen it because it's been widely shared on social media. It's fairly long, but I'll read the whole thing to you just so you can get the gist of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, or talking into. The post says this: "It is getting to that time of the year, and I'm concerned at how Australia has ramped up the selling of Halloween stuff. Every year it gets worse and worse, more and more graphic. It comes across as a little bit of innocent fun and dress up, but is it? Maybe it is about taking on a different identity or persona, even with alternative events. Remember, our world is more spiritual than natural, so parents, please be wise. Have a read of this and do yourself a favor. Purchase the book Out of the Devil's Cauldron, an eye-opening book, and then see what this guy says about Halloween." Of course, the post is referring to ex-satanist John Ramirez, who warns parents of the dangers of celebrating Halloween. I quote John Ramirez here: "It's like having a one-night stand with the devil." There's a quote by Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, where he says in his own words, "I want to thank every Christian parent for allowing their children to celebrate the devil one night out of the year, which is Halloween. He's intentionally thanking Christian parents. Thank you for dressing up your kids, changing their identity, sacrificing spiritually." He likened the practice to having a one-night stand, saying, "We go celebrate Halloween, we're in bed with the devil for one night." To me, it's like, why would you want to cheat on Jesus? Jesus doesn't cheat on you. I don't see the Satanists coming to your church to cheat on the devil. No way. John Ramirez was once one of the highest-ranking warlocks in the world until Jesus saved his life. His friends called him Lucifer's son because Satan himself would visit him regularly in his bedroom to talk about strategies for destroying people's lives. One night, John had a near-death experience where he found himself in hell, but Jesus showed up himself and gave him one last chance to come to Christ. John took that chance and never looked back. Ramirez came back from that near-death experience and destroyed $100,000 worth of satanic paraphernalia in his New York home, and was then tormented for 30 days by his past demons. But it didn't stop him from living his new life for Christ. Today, he is a pastor, evangelist, and best-selling Christian author, and he warns the church of the dangers and realities of spiritual warfare. And this is another quote from John Ramirez at the end of this rather long post. "The only harvest we should celebrate is the harvest of souls," Ramirez said. "Jesus Christ is your answer. It's a relationship with God. Make peace with God. Pray. Prayer works. The power of Satan is limited. It's a hoax. And the power of Jesus is limitless. And it brings you to a place of knowing your purpose and destiny of who you really are created to be." I got to say, I really agree with that last paragraph. Jesus is your answer. The power of Satan is limited. It is a hoax. That is true. And so in the light of the truth of that last paragraph, I wonder about all of the outrage and fear expressed in that post about Halloween. So there's so much to unpack here, and I'll do my very best to address everything. But first, let's look at the history of Halloween. I'd like to acknowledge the allaboutgod.com website as the source of some of the information that I'm using in the first part of our time together. Hallow is the same word for holy, and we find that in the Lord's Prayer, of course. Hallowed be your name. And Ian, E''En, is a contraction of evening. So Halloween is a shortened form of All Hallows Eve, which is the day before All Saints' Day. Halloween had its roots in the ancient Celtic tribes of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Brittany. Not Britney Spears, of course. On October the 31st, the tribes would celebrate the festival of Samhain, spelled Samhain. During this festival, Celts believed the souls of the dead, including ghosts, goblins, and witches, returned to mingle with the living. In order to scare away the evil spirits, people would wear masks and light bonfires, which is why people dress up on All Hallows Eve, even to this day. When the Romans conquered the Celts, they added their own touches to the Samhain festival, such as making centerpieces out of apples and nuts for Pomona, the Roman goddess of the orchards. The Romans also bobbed for apples and drank cider, traditions that may sound familiar to you, particularly if you come from the Northern Hemisphere. The Christian aspect of this holiday began in 835 AD when Pope Gregory IV moved the celebration for all the martyrs, later called All Saints, from May 13th to November the 1st. The night before became known as All Hallows Eve or Holy Evening. Eventually, the name was shortened to the current Halloween, just as we've changed other words. So, for example, holiday used to be Holy Day, and Saturday used to be called Saturn's Day in honor of the god of Saturn, the planet. And so I don't see anyone kicking up a fuss about, Saturday and all of that kind of stuff, even though it's named after an idol. The purpose of these feasts is to remember those who have died. It is a celebration of the communion of saints, which reminds us that the church is not bound by space or time. So it seems that Halloween shares a similar history to Christmas. December 25th was the birthday of Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun. It started the festival of Saturnalia, which continued for a full month. It was a self-indulgent time when food and drink were plentiful. Sounds a bit like Christmas does today. It wasn't until the 4th century that the church decided to make this date Jesus' birthday. It's very unlikely, can I say, that Jesus was born in the middle of a Northern Hemisphere winter. The shepherds certainly wouldn't have been out watching their flocks. If they were freezing to death. Both Halloween and Christmas were pagan festivals that were adopted by the church for the purpose of using an established celebration to remember and share Christian truth. And now the pagans want their celebrations back. Halloween starts the church's liturgical period of All Hallowtide from October 31st to the morning of November the 3rd. The season is observed by the Roman Catholic Church, the Evangelical Lutheran churches, Anglican Church, and some other Protestant churches. Because All Hallowtide commemorates Christians who have died, Halloween has become identified by characters representing the dead, zombies, and the like. But of course, the tradition goes much deeper. November the 1st is All Saints' Day and is also called All Hallows Day or Hallow Mass. It's a Christian feast day celebrating the mystery that God has called people into a relationship with himself through Jesus. And then the following day, November the 2nd, is All Souls' Day, which remembers Christians who have died in faith and for faith, the martyrs. Pope Francis beautifully expresses this day as follows: "The blood of our Christian brothers and sisters is a testimony which cries out to be heard. It makes no difference whether they be Catholics, Orthodox, Copts, or Protestants. They are Christians. Their blood is one and the same. Their blood confesses Christ. And so Christians are encouraged to reflect on the glorious mystery that God has provided for everyone to enjoy a relationship with himself through Jesus. If you already enjoy such a connection to God, bask in it. And if not, the way is open. All you need to do is ask Jesus for that relationship. So that gives you a little bit of history of Halloween. And I'll come back in just a moment and address some of the concerns, I guess, that are expressed in the Facebook post that I read a few minutes ago. But let's take a break for a moment. I've got a few other comments here. Where are we? Let's have a look. Hi to Chris and Tom. God bless you. Good day to Kelly. Mark Mano says, God bless Pastor Rob and everyone else. Welcome, Mark. Lorraine, sorry I'm late. I've been out getting my treats. Yeah, sure you have, Lorraine. God bless you. Lorraine's joining us from Adelaide, of course. And Jill, welcome to you too, part of our church online congregation. Lovely to have you all with me tonight. Keep those comments and questions coming through. Just before I get into the next part of this, I just want to mention a message that I preached a couple of days ago, Sunday morning at Bayside Church. I started a mini series, only about 2 or maybe 3 messages in this series, but it's called Welcome to Our Messy Church. And I acknowledge the fact that every church is full of imperfect people. And so every church has the potential to be messy. And we looked at Jesus' messy disciples, and then we looked at Jesus' messy churches in the New Testament, factoring in, of course, that pretty well every letter that's written and recorded for us in the New Testament scriptures was written to correct either a conflict or doctrinal errors in the first century church. And so that kind of sets the pattern for us. So if you missed that message, I encourage you to go online, go to baysidechurch.com.au, and you can enjoy either watching or listening to that message. And I'll be preaching part 2 in a couple of weeks on Sunday, November the 12th. Okay, let's take a closer look at the Facebook page I read a few minutes ago, post rather. I've seen it a lot, but it's not the sort of thing I would share. I find myself actually reacting to some of the content, such as statements like this. Every year it gets worse and worse, more and more graphic. And it's true, I guess, that the American celebration of Halloween, the trick-or-treat thing, has become more popular in Australia over the past few years. But what I guess I react to is the alarmist view of the world. And I want to fess up here. I used to embrace this, the whole narrative that the world is getting worse and worse. I mean, if you have a futurist view of the book of Revelation, for example, your expectation is that the world will get worse and worse and worse. The only problem is that history doesn't back up that narrative. History shows that things were a lot worse 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and 2,000 years ago. And if you go back even further than that, it was even worse still. And so everything's getting worse and worse, except it isn't. Now, I'm not saying that life isn't extremely difficult for many people in some parts of the world. I'm thinking right now, obviously, of Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Afghanistan, North Korea, parts of Africa like the Sudan, where things like war, famine, and oppressive governments make life awfully tough for precious people. I'm also not suggesting that life is rosy for everyone in Australia. But on the whole, we are very blessed in this country, which also goes for many other parts of the world too. Overall, the world is better today than it was, say, 100 years ago. For example, there's less extreme poverty and hunger in the world today than in time past. Child labor is on the decline. Life expectancy is rising. Child mortality is down. Homicide rates have fallen dramatically. Yes, even in the United States. More people live in a democracy today than ever before. More people are going to school for longer. And as a result, literacy rates are way up as well. There's many other indicators. And if you're interested in that topic, feel free to Google it. And so when I hear people say every year it's getting worse and worse, I feel a reaction on the inside of me. Really, I am done with this so-called Christian form of outrage. It appears to me that some of Jesus' followers need to be outraged over something as fuel that keeps their faith relevant. They're always outraged about something, and they go from outrage to outrage. We saw it, people were outraged over, for example, in 2017, here in Australia, we had a postal survey where people voted in favor of same-sex marriage. Then those same people were outraged about the pandemic restrictions and outraged over the vaccines. And now they're outraged every year about Halloween and so on. Always got to be outraged about something. And I don't believe that that's an appropriate way for God's people to live or express themselves. What about this guy, John Ramirez, an ex-satanist? I hadn't heard of him before I saw this post, but I have Googled him. And I think it's wonderful that he has experienced a life transformation and come to Christ. But his story actually reminds me of a similar person who I looked up to greatly during the late 70s and early 80s as I was in the early years of my Christian faith. The guy's name is Mike Warnke. Maybe you've come across him. Maybe you've heard of him. Again, you can Google him. His stuff's probably on Spotify, I would imagine, or maybe YouTube. Mike was a Christian evangelist and comedian, and he put out quite a few comedy records, and I had them all. And he wrote a book, which I read as well, called The Satan Cellar. And the book records details of Mike Warnke's participation in sexual orgies, alcoholism, and drug dealing. His rise in the ranks of Satanism to the level of high priest, presiding over satanic rituals, including magic spells, summoning demons, ritual sex, including kidnap and rape, the attempt on his life, a heroin overdose, his heroism in Vietnam in the war, and how he found Jesus and came home as an evangelist. The story ends with Warnke living happily in California with his wife, Sue Studder. In fewer than 3 months after the release, The Satan Cellar had become a religious bestseller. And some of that information is taken from Wikipedia. I loved Mike Warnke in my early years as a Christian. He was cool. I read his story. I played his comedy records on the radio. Of course, I was a DJ back in those days on the top 40 station in Western Australia. When I came back to my faith in Jesus in 1979, I went to see my boss and I told him about my conversion to Christianity. And I asked him if I could have some time on the radio to do a gospel program. And he gave me 15 minutes on a Monday night. And for part of that 15 minutes, I'd share a little bit, play a track or two, and then maybe a snippet from Mike Warnke. After a while, he liked it so much, he extended it to half an hour. And then I got a sponsor for the program, a businessman from my church who sponsored it. And they gave me an hour. So an hour on every Monday night between 8 and 9, I used to do a program called Good News. And lots of stuff, interviews, music, and Mike Warnke with his Christian comedy. Now, many details of Mike Warnke's story were increasingly exaggerated by Warnke, but his story played well into what became known as the Satanic Panic, which gripped much of the church for most of the 1980s. The Satanic Panic was baseless conspiracy theories about cults committing mass ritual, child abuse, and worshipping Satan. Ken Lanning, who was an FBI agent back in the day, he worked on hundreds of so-called abuse cases with the Bureau's Behavioral Science Unit, and he said this: the evidence wasn't there, but the allegations of satanic ritual abuse never really went away. When people get emotionally involved in an issue, common sense and reason go out the window. People believe what they want and need to believe. So there's a guy who was high up in the FBI who investigated many of these so-called satanic ritual abuse cases and found that there was zero evidence for them. If you're interested in finding out a bit more about the satanic panic, there has been some podcasts done on this. The podcast Cults did about 3 or 4 episodes, so it's well worth checking out. And there is also a podcast called Satanic Panic. It's on Spotify. I imagine it's on other platforms as well. And so you can search that if you'd like to know a little bit more. I started my first years as a Christian during that time. And I got to say, I bought right into it. I thought it was real, but it all turned out to be an absolute hoax. It's easy to blame so-called Satanists for child abuse. Of course, well before the 1980s, children were being abused, but the abuse was happening in churches and church-run organizations, as well as sporting clubs, the Scouts, government orphanages, and schools, and so on. It's easier for us to look out of the window than in the mirror. And that's what the satanic panic was all about. And that's the narrative that people like John Ramirez are propagating 40 years later. The problem is those people out there. And we Christians need to be outraged and outspoken in denouncing them. And I think we need to take a good, long, hard look at the mirror, because I didn't hear much outrage from Christians when the outcomes of the Royal Commission here in Australia into institutional responses to child abuse, and so many of them happened because of priests and pastors and church workers and volunteers within churches. And yet all the time this stuff was going on, Christians were pointing the finger at the world about stuff that wasn't even going on. Anyway, back to Mike Warnke. His records became the most popular Christian comedy albums ever produced. Through the 80s, he and his third wife toured extensively and raised millions of dollars for their ministry. Churches and Christians loved him. I loved him. He was a Christian superstar, but we were all deceived. In 1991, Cornerstone magazine launched an investigation into Warnke's life and testimony. The investigation included interviews with over 100 of Warnke's personal friends and acquaintances. His ministry's tax receipts were also examined. The search exposed a number of inaccuracies and evidence of fraud and deceit in Warnke's accounts. It appears that Warnke's entire story was fabricated, the Satan seller, all made up. Friends reported that he was given to fanciful stories and that at no time was he a Satanist priest or an emaciated drug addict sporting long fingernails and waist-length hair. Neither had he met Charles Manson in a coven, another claim of his. Manson was actually in prison at the time. The investigation also revealed the unfavorable circumstances surrounding Warnke's multiple marriages, affairs, and divorces. He's been married and divorced 4 times. There's at least one report of him beating his second wife. We were all duped by him. While I'm not suggesting that John Ramirez has made up his story, I do recommend that we Christians refrain from being gullible, like I was back in the 80s. It's easy for someone to say that they were the highest ranking of warlocks in the world, but the story needs to be verified. Is there proof that he was a high-ranking warlock? I can't find anything online that proves that. Is there any proof that he destroyed $100,000 worth of satanic paraphernalia in his New York home? Did he video this or take any photos? $100,000 is a lot of money. What exactly did he destroy and how? If you Google satanic paraphernalia, it comes up with t-shirts and pendants. $100,000 is a lot of t-shirts and pendants. Where was the so-called witchcraft church that Ramirez was part of? And what were the names of any of the murder victims he claimed to have been close to as a kid? Also, will he turn himself into police for killing people in an ICU ward while he was astral projecting? And does he have doctor's reports that verify he was blind for a year until surgery restored his sight. All of these things are claims of John Ramirez with no proof. I feel like another Mike Wonky is in the wind here. The little I've seen of John Ramirez shows a guy who changes details in the story each time he tells it. Maybe Cornerstone Magazine could do some investigation to verify his story, as they've done on Mike Wonky and others. One other thing from this post is worth mentioning, and that's the supposed quote by Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, where he says in his own words, and then it's quoted, I want to thank every Christian parent for allowing their children to celebrate the devil one night out of every year. If Anton LaVey did say those words, and there's zero proof that he did, he was likely being sarcastic. LaVey was an atheist. He didn't believe in God, and neither did he worship Satan. He, like other Satanists, was a materialist who didn't believe in supernatural beings. Satanists do not believe that Satan exists. Neither do they believe in the human soul or life after death. They're total materialists. They do not believe in the supernatural realm. Anton LaVey's particular brand of Satanism, he's dead now, of course, was nothing like what most people envision when they think of devil worship. LaVey's satanic philosophy was self-centered and self-indulgent. It wasn't an overly demonic, as some would suggest. And that's true of modern Satanism in general, where the basic tenets include these things. You decide what's right and wrong. Everyone's relative, right? If it feels good to you, it must be good for you. Deny yourself nothing, and you will suffer less. If it works, if it is efficient, if it produces results, it is good. And number 5, self-expression and self-actualization are the greatest goods. Now, I've met plenty of Christians who live like that, and I don't doubt that I've been guilty of some of those things too, but it doesn't mean we are devil worshippers. John Ramirez's story sounds like it was based on movies, an overly fertile imagination, and some evangelistic exaggeration. In a moment, I'll give you what I believe is a better way to interact with Halloween and other festivals with which we may disagree. All right, let me take a quick break here and wet the whistle. Okay, some comments have come through here. Good day, Hamish. God bless you. Welcome tonight. Kelly says, my Catholic faith says anger is a sin, so outrage is something we shouldn't display. It's not necessary and doesn't give a good example of how peaceful it is to live with the Holy Spirit. I love that, Kelly. I don't think anger is a sin, by the way. The Bible says that we can be angry but not sin. So lots of things can make you angry. I get angry at the injustice in the world and all of that kind of thing. I got very angry around the Royal Commission with the outcomes that showed the dreadful child abuse that went on through churches over decades, and the lack of outrage that was expressed by Christians during that time. So we can be angry at injustice. The Bible tells us that God gets angry at different things, but he doesn't lose his temper. And I think that's the key. So you can hold that anger and express it in healthy ways, but it's when it becomes destructive that it definitely becomes sinful. But I just think being outraged all the time about different things is unhelpful. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't help anything. Selena says, Rob, I read this book when I was in year 11. Sony was about 16 or 17, and I never finished it. I've always wondered what the ending was. Thanks. So you mean the Satan Seller, I would imagine there, Selena. Yeah, don't bother to finish it. I mean, look, I read the whole thing as a new Christian, and I loved every minute of it. It was a ripper story. And if it was a novel, it would have been good. But Mike Wonky made it out that this was his story. And as I said before, the guy was a total fraud, which is really, really sad. Mark says, my Jehovah's Witness friend says birthdays is a pagan celebration, but if Jesus was raised as a Jew, then wouldn't he have attended birthday parties? Good question. I will get back to you on that. I'll have a chat with Tal, my Jewish friend. Good evening to Nika. God bless you. Jill says, I remember those days, Rob. I look back now and realize how bizarre it all was. It really was, Jill. And, I was a young Christian. And also, that was pre-internet. So we didn't have the ability to search and to find this stuff out. So it took a magazine like Cornerstone to do a deep dive on this stuff and to spend months, visiting, finding Mike Walke's friends and chatting with them and piecing the whole thing together. So to do some really good investigative journalism, and then of course eventually they put it out in the early 90s. And I'm going to say I was devastated when I found out about Mike Wonke being a fraud. I was absolutely devastated because I love the guy. And some of his stuff really helped me as a new Christian. But anyway, Carolyn says, new word, evangelistic. Absolutely. That was very deliberate. Where are we? Oh, wow. This is interesting. So Selena found the Satan Seller in the nonfiction section of my school library. Wow. Need go and tell the school. It was total fiction. Kelly said I explained that correctly. Thank you. And Alice, God bless you. Just come to join you. So glad you have, Alice. Lovely to have you here. And one more comment here. This is from Sam. Rob, thank you. I love this so much. Fear and panic is exactly what it is. And now I can articulate how I have been feeling. I can't imagine that families and their children go around thinking Halloween is satanic. Yet if we pull the Christian card on how bad it is, to them we look extreme and crazy. We are so blessed to have the freedom. I'd rather have children knock on the door, see kindness and love, and walking away and say, wow, they were lovely, rather than having my door locked. Absolutely, Sam. I agree with you. And, I went over the road to the shops a little bit earlier tonight. I was cooking some dinner and I needed to go and get a couple of things. So I walked over. We're not far from our local shopping center. I'm going to tell you, the whole street and around the shopping center was just buzzing with life. There were kids and parents walking around. Some of them were dressed up. Some of them weren't. They were dressed up in all sorts of things. By the way, I was at a cafe yesterday morning. I heard this little boy who was being asked by one of the waiters, what are you going to be dressing up for Halloween? He says, I'm dressing up as Iron Man. And he was so excited about it. So I didn't see Iron Man. I did see Spider-Man tonight and a few others, and fairies and goblins, and lots of people actually not dressed up. But can I tell you, as I walked around our shopping strip, there was just such a buzz of community and excitement. And I've been a Christian for a while now, and I know what the Holy Spirit feels like. And I can tell you that the Holy Spirit in me was not disturbed by what I saw and experienced. What I saw was families and kids having a lot of fun and enjoying a bit of fantasy, So let's not bar humbug all this stuff away. All right. So rather than fear and outrage, what would be a better way to interact with Halloween? I think the Apostle Paul gives us an excellent pattern to follow. Paul had arrived in the city of Athens, and he was waiting for Silas and Timothy to join him. We read about this in Acts chapter 17. And so Paul goes for a walk. He starts to walk around the city. And Acts 17 verse 16 tells us that Paul was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. I want you to think about that for a moment, how Paul was feeling on the inside, greatly distressed. But then he goes and chats with some of the people of Athens. And this is what he says to them. I see that in every way you are very religious, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. Aren't they wonderful words? I just love that. I find Paul's choice of words here absolutely fascinating. Remember, first of all, that when he was walking around Athens, waiting for his friends to arrive, he was greatly distressed by their idolatry, but he didn't communicate his unhappiness to them. He was highly considerate in addressing the people. He actually complimented them on their spiritual devotion, and he referred to their idols as objects of worship. I think there's a lesson there for all Christians. Are we courteous or are we judgmental when interacting with others about what they consider precious or enjoyable, such as Halloween, or maybe Diwali, or Ramadan, or any other festival? Much of what I've seen on Facebook posted by Christians about Halloween was based on fear, outrage, and judgment. For example, yesterday I saw this on Facebook. Remember, people, Satan comes disguised as an angel of light. If you are truly saved, the Holy Spirit will make you not want to celebrate this holiday. There's so much wrong with this judgmental statement. I know Christians who love Jesus and choose to celebrate Halloween. It's their choice, and I won't judge them, and neither will I cancel them. And, you know, this is another thing I find fascinating, and this is particularly from Christians who are always getting outraged. One of the things they get outraged about is cancel culture. So they always feel like they're being canceled. Can I say, everything I ever learned about cancel culture, I learned from Christians. When I first became a Christian, so much in my life, they tried to cancel. Now, use your imagination here. I had long blonde hair. And on Sunday mornings, I used to go down to the beach and I'd body surf for an hour or two. And then I'd go to church, still wearing my board shorts, wearing thongs on my feet and a singlet. And I'd just rock into church, still with sand around my ankles from being at the beach. I was just happy to be in church with God's people, worshiping him and all of that. But I copped so much judgment, particularly from the pastor. And the pressure was on because everybody in the church were wearing suits and ties. The guys were, at least. Women wore dresses and head coverings. And to be a Christian, Rob, you need to cut your hair, get some decent clothes, buy a suit and tie. And so much was cancelled. As Christians, we weren't allowed to drink. We weren't allowed to smoke. We weren't allowed to dance. We weren't allowed to have a TV. We couldn't go to the cinema to watch movies. It was all cancelled. And that's what I see from some of these people always banging on about stuff being cancelled. And yet when the boot's on the other foot, what they want to do is cancel stuff. They want to cancel Halloween and other things. You know, the Puritans back in England in 1647 cancelled Christmas and Easter. That's right, from 1647 to 1660, because Christmas and Easter led to people celebrating and eating. And so we can't have people being full of joy and eating food. And so the Christian Puritans cancelled Christmas for 13 years. That's what fundamentalism in its extreme will do. And you'll see some of that in these Facebook posts. Paul had learned to place a filter between his feelings and his words, and we would do well to imitate his example. When responding to Halloween, Christians must choose not to be a wet blanket. Jesus was often found hanging out at parties and dinners with those who were scorned by the religious people of his day, and he was criticized for it. He was there so he could impact the lives of others. Both Jesus and Paul engaged with the culture of their day. I encourage you to read Acts chapter 17 and note that Paul didn't just read the Bible, he also read philosophy and history and poetry, and he uses all of those in Acts 17 to communicate the gospel. What he was doing was finding common ground with his audience. He connected the dots and introduced them to Jesus as a result. The Bible is replete with examples like this. Consider what God used to lead the Magi to Jesus. Remember them, the wise men? They were astronomers. If you were trying to communicate to astronomers to lead them to Jesus, what would you use? Maybe a star. What a great choice. Jesus' parables revolved around the interests and industries of first century people. God established common ground with people by becoming one of us in the person of Jesus. So instead of staying inside your house and putting a sign on the door that says, "We don't celebrate Halloween, go away." How about stocking up on lollies to give generously to children who knock on your door? I've heard of people setting up an urn in their driveway and giving out free tea and coffee and cool drinks to the parents and the children as they walk around the street, having little lolly bags already made up to hand out to kids. We did that one year. Christy and I, we didn't let our children dress up as witches and goblins. They actually didn't want to dress up as witches and goblins. They'd dress up in other things like, fairy costumes or whatever. One year, our youngest daughter, Trinity, and I bought several bags of lollies and walked around the streets handing them out to kids. When I took our other two daughters to our church youth group one year, we pulled the car over several times to hand out lollies. One dad asked me why we were doing this, and I told him that we were on our way to church and wanted to make sure that we had a chance to be generous on our way. The look on his face was priceless. I think we shattered his preconception of Christians. People will remember how you treated them far more than what you told them. And so let's bring some positives about Halloween and not take on the spirit of Scrooge. Let's find some culture that we can connect with at times like Halloween and Diwali and Ramadan and other festivals that we Christians may not celebrate, but other people do. And, think about how you would feel about someone not honoring Christmas, for example. How slighted you feel. Well, the Bible says to treat others the way you would like them to treat you, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the golden rule and the royal law. They're the foundation of the way that we are to live as Christians. I think another thing that I'd reflect on here too is that Halloween is fantasy. The modern production of Halloween, if you like, it's fantasy. It's not reality. Satanists don't behave in that way. All right, it's really important that we blow that out of the water. And there's plenty of fantasy that Christians have enjoyed over the years. Revelation is a great example. It's a book of fantasy. It's metaphorical stories that are packed with truth. But there isn't a 10-headed monster coming out of the sea. But there's a lot of symbolism there. And there's amazing truth in the book of Revelation. But we don't throw it away because it's got a dragon and Satan and all of these other bizarre characters. We honor it for what it is, part of the sacred scriptures. You think of J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, some really bizarre characters in Lord of the Rings. And of course, C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicles too. I mean, it's got a good witch and a bad witch. And it's got a lot of other characters as well. But we've enjoyed it for decades because they're amazing stories and they're packed full of truth. And I think Harry Potter has resonated with a whole generation. I know our youngest, who didn't like reading, suddenly switched on to Harry Potter and became an avid reader. So it's not reality, it's fantasy. And they're ripper stories, all of the ones I've just mentioned, and we should be able to enjoy them. And so they're my comments on a Christian, I believe, a Christian response to Halloween. There you go. I've got a few comments. Let me interact with these and then we'll finish up for the night. Samantha says, I've been running around as Batgirl. Way to go. Yeah, there's a lot of people in different outfits and it's just a lot of fun. Why can't people celebrate other things instead? What do you mean other things? Halloween is definitely not a Christian celebration. It actually is. Maybe you've just tuned in, Linda, but All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, All Souls Day has been celebrated in a significant part of the Christian church now for many, many centuries. So what we have today as a modern expression of that are traditions that have been kind of passed down. The dressing up, as witches or goblins or whatever. As I said earlier in our chat together, is superstition, where superstitious people hundreds of years ago thought that by dressing up in that way that they would actually scare evil spirits away. Now, we know today that that's not true, okay? And so people celebrate lots of things, Linda. We celebrate Easter, we celebrate Good Friday, we celebrate Christmas. I love the times, actually, we've been in Bali near Christmas time, and to see that, Bali is a predominantly Hindu part of Indonesia, and Indonesia is the world's largest Muslim population. And so right there in the middle of Islam and Hinduism, they honor Christian tourists by celebrating Christmas as well, even though it's not one of their traditions. And so, why can't we Christians have a kind attitude toward other people who just want to celebrate? Okay. And so I just don't think it's a big deal. Tal, we do birthdays. I'm so glad to hear that. Life cycle events, this is for Jewish people, are simchas, joyous moments. What might seem unique is after someone has passed on, we remember them on the day of their passing, not their birthday. It is their Yaziet, I'm thinking, the anniversary of their passing. We celebrate the completion of their life, their end of their physical journey, and we observe their return. That is magnificent. I absolutely love that. That is so cool. And that's I guess what I'm talking about here. So Tal is a Jewish man, right? And he's a good friend, and he loves God, and he does not share my Christian faith, but we share our God. Okay. But there is a tradition that Tal talks about there, which is a Jewish celebration, because we Christians will continue to remember a deceased person's birthday. We also, of course, will mark the day of their passing, but we actually don't celebrate the completion of someone's life. Or maybe we do. Maybe we do in a funeral service, we celebrate, but it's not an annual event. Whereas I love that. That's magnificent. Thank you for sharing that, Tal. And then on a lighter note, he says everyone was wearing suits and ties. Oh, except Jesus. Yes, of course. Oh, dear me. Ross, thank you. I'm glad you've enjoyed that tonight. Hi to Siobhan as well, who sends a couple of emojis there. Kelly, Christians know how to use Instagram filters, but Paul has the best filter. Some Christians should use Paul's filter more. Beautifully said, Selena. I couldn't agree more. Carolyn says, I think you mean Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rigs. It's about life on amongst some oil workers. Lord of the Rigs, full of Bible concepts. Yeah, it certainly is. And I don't think Tolkien, from what I've read, Tolkien didn't write The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings to convey Christian truth. But what he did was that as a Catholic, he had a very strong faith in God and in Jesus. And so his worldview came through in his writings. So as you read The Lord of the Rings, or if you watch the movies, it's full of Christian truth. It's full of truth. It's amazing. C.S. Lewis, on the other hand, as a Protestant Christian, deliberately, I believe, set about to write the Narnia Chronicles to express the gospel, particularly to children. And I think he did that very successfully. So here we are decades later, still enjoying the books, the Narnia Chronicles, and of course the movies of those books as well that came out a number of years ago. So both of their faith, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's faith, come through very strongly in their writings. Mark Brown says, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde were very popular in the 1950s. Yes, they were. Indeed. Hyde is, I think, Hyde, but that doesn't matter. Sharon, g'day to you and Dino, joining me from Bendigo, I believe. I agree. Kids love dressing up. It's about community. Absolutely. Um, yes. And then Carolyn corrects herself. Lord of the Rings. Indeed. HR Puffin Stuff had a witch in it, says Len. I believe so. Jill says, I love that towel. Like I've gone home. Indeed. And Grant says, thank you, Pastor Rod, for tonight. Great insights and wisdom about Halloween. I've loved sharing them with you. And now, next Tuesday is Melbourne Cup Day here in Melbourne. So we won't be doing Tuesday Night Live next Tuesday, but I will be back the Tuesday after that, which I'm just doing a quick calculation. I think is November the 14th. Yes, November the 14th. So have a wonderful week, a wonderful weekend. We have a long weekend this weekend in Melbourne for a horse race. So enjoy it. And I do believe that the weather in Melbourne is going to be good as well over the long weekend, which will be so good. So anyway, thank you for joining me. Good night. God bless you and have a wonderful week. See ya.